Marine veteran Lynn Lowder is advocating for veteran entrepreneurship initiatives with his nonprofit, One Vet at a Time. Up next on Veteran on the Move.
Welcome to Veteran on the Move. If you're a veteran in transition, an entrepreneur wannabe, or someone still stuck in that job trying to escape, this podcast is dedicated to your success. And now, your host, Joe Crane.
The top 7 paths to freedom is my free gift to you for listening to the show, featuring 7 great ways for a veteran to take their first step into the exciting world of entrepreneurship. To receive your free gift, go to veteranonthemove.com, or if you're listening on a mobile device, you can text the word veteran to 38470. Lynn Lowder has diverse leadership and management experience in business, law, and the military. As a Marine, he commanded a Marine Rifle Platoon, 2 Marine Rifle Companies, an overseas Marine Security Guard Company, and a Marine Special Operations team in Vietnam. A decorated combat veteran, he served as a team leader with 1st Force Reconnaissance Company Special Operations in South Vietnam, where he was awarded the Silver Star for Valor, the Bronze Star Medal with Combat V, and the Purple Heart for wounds received in action. Lynn is a nationally recognized veterans' rights advocate on VA healthcare benefits, PTSD, TBI, and entrepreneurship initiatives. He is a founder and CEO of One Vet at a Time, a 501c4 organization advocating veteran business ownership opportunities. All right, Lynn Lowder, welcome to Veteran on the Move. Before we get to talking about business and entrepreneurship, take us back and tell us what you did in the Marine Corps.
Sure, Joe. I was a football player out at Northern Illinois University back in the Stone Age in the early 60s. And Vietnam War was starting to heat up, and I'd always wanted to be a Marine. So after my junior season, I dropped out, enlisted in the Marine Corps, went through boot camp as an enlisted Marine. Shortly after that, or not long after that, got flagged off for the ECP program. Transitioned over, OCS, basic school, became a Marine lieutenant, infantry. I went to Vietnam, and because I had the recon secondary MOS as an enlisted Marine, I was able to position myself to become a recon team leader in 1st Force Reconnaissance Company, and did that in Vietnam from December 68 to December 69. Came back, played football for the Marine Corps in Quantico, 1970. On my way out, decided to augment, ended up spending a total of about 16 years in the Marine Corps, 10 in the infantry, finished an undergrad degree in that time frame, and then had the opportunity to get a law degree, gave the Marine Corps back the 3 years that I had committed to, and came out into the civilian world back here in Chicago as a trial lawyer. That was my introduction, if you will, or my time frame from transitioning from the Marine Corps into civilian life. Out here, I was a trial lawyer for 20 years, defending physicians a lot. Had the opportunity to get into corporate law, which I wanted to do. I wanted to get into the position, ultimately, of being an operating officer in a company, developing teamwork, applying those leadership skills that we learned as Marines. So I was a general counsel in a large franchise, California, mailboxes, etc., for about 2 years. After that, had the opportunity to become the chief operating officer for Colt Firearms, did that. And then ultimately back to Chicago, and was able to work in a handful of companies along the way, becoming an operating officer. About, 2012 it was, I had the opportunity to go to a regional university in the state of Missouri, the University of Central Missouri, and help them stand up a veterans program, and I did. It was within that time frame, Joe, that I had an opportunity to deal with a number of post 9/11 veterans, very much up close and personal. Many of these veterans, I was very impacted by how sharp they were, how much combat time they had, and it really dusted off my post-Vietnam brain. I could see these young men and women there in school. They were there enrolled and getting an education, but in many cases they were thinking way ahead of it. And once these individuals found out I had a business background, I had a great deal of dialogue with a number of these veterans on basics of business. How do I get into a business? What type of business would be good for me? What do you do when you get there? How do you operate? How do you manage? How do you market? All those types of things. Long story short, I came away with a clear notion that a number of our veterans would be far better off being the captain of their own rowboat than being buried somewhere down in the engine room of a large ship. So not long after I came back from the University of Central Missouri, we grew the program from a little north of 400 veterans to a little north of 1,400 veterans in a little less than a year, and that mainly by word of mouth. I could go into the practical aspects of a Marine or of a veteran, rather, getting into higher ed and all that. And I'm not downing higher education by any stretch of the imagination, but it is one of a few choices for veterans when they get out. And veterans have a lot more going for themselves, I believe, than they think they do in terms of getting into business for themselves. Let me make one more point and then I'll shut up. In the process of getting up to speed with veterans and entrepreneurship, I did a lot of work on and research on the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944. And I learned that the basic thrust of the legislation, Joe, was full employment. That and that alone, full employment. And so you had some choices under the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 44. You could go to college, get a degree, and then go get a job. The legislative notes indicate that most of the legislatures, frankly, didn't think that many veterans would be that interested in doing that. Sitting in a classroom with 18-year-olds, that kind of thing. You could get a trade and get a job. Also, very importantly, you had an option that went away in the early 50s. The option was if you wanted to purchase business property or a farm, the Fed would be a loan guarantor, a 50% loan guarantor, up to a total of $2,000, which would be a lot more money in today's dollars. And you could get going down that road. In other words, basically run your own farm, run your own business. In the 9 years following World War II, Joe, 49% of surviving veterans ended up doing exactly that. Today, the number is about 6 to 7%. The reason why more don't do it, can't do it, is one simple major impediment, and that is lack of access to capital. Back in the post-Vietnam or post-World War II era, it was a different America, I think, in many ways. Communities were tighter, and banking was a lot more community-oriented. So under that scenario, the loan that a veteran would get to buy business property or buy a farm would be a community-based loan. And in that day and age, the local bankers in your town knew your mom, knew your dad, your brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, grandpa, grandma, all of that. We were much more, I think, socially and community connected than we are now. Nowadays, smaller banks have been gobbled up. It's strictly business. It's a credit profile. It's collateral. It's all of that. And that has been the principal primary impediment for our veterans being able to become the owners of their own business, if you will. And it's most unfortunate, I think. So basically, I stood up a 501c4 to go after that, to see what we could do to take care of that and make some progress. And that's what I've been doing. I can talk more about that later.
I think you did that all on one breath. That was incredible. You perfectly described all the reasons why I started this podcast. All the reasons, because I think the way your analogy was, you think veterans are better off being at the helm of their own rowboat than being buried down in the gallows of the engine room somewhere as some corporation. I agree with that completely. So that was my whole motivation for starting this podcast over 3 years ago, was just trying to help and inspire veterans to at least consider entrepreneurship and not undervalue the skill sets that they have and the motivation that they have to become a successful entrepreneur.
Oh, well, good on you for doing it, Joe.
Now, can you explain what a 501c4 is? Because most of us are familiar with your typical nonprofit 501c3.
Sure. A 501c3, you can go out and raise money for a particular cause, but you are not supposed to advocate. 501c4, the principal difference is you can advocate. If people do make donations, they're not tax deductible, where with the 501c3, they are. We stood this thing up almost 4 years ago. We have 4 people involved in this, all total, myself included. Some real sharp people on our little volunteer fire team, and we've been paying for it out of our own pocket and doing what we can to advance this ball down the field, if you will. But that's the principal difference: is donations, are they tax deductible? Are they not? And can you advocate or can you not? And that's where we are with the 501c4. We knew going right in that we were absolutely positively going to be advocating, and we certainly have been doing that. If you'd like to know more, I can kind of go down that road a bit.
All right, well, hold that thought, Lynn. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Have you joined the Veteran on the Move Facebook group? I personally invite every guest that I have on the podcast to join the group. So the Veteran on the Move Facebook group is a great way to connect with previous podcast guests. Our Facebook group will keep you in touch with other veterans that are transitioning to entrepreneurship, and you will also get great updates and free guides on the people, programs, and resources that will help you in your transition to entrepreneurship. All right, we're back here talking with Lynn Lowder from One Vet at a Time. And Lynn, before the break, we were talking about the difference between a 501c3 and a 501c4. And in addition to receiving tax-deductible donations in a 501c3 and a non-taxable donations in a 501c4, you mentioned advocating. So a 501c3 does not advocate, but a 501c4 does. What exactly do you mean by advocating?
In our particular case, Joe, it has to do with lobbying for change in law, both at the federal level and the state level. So you're not supposed to be doing that for sure if you're a 501c3. And frankly, that's exactly where we went with this effort. As I said before, we've got a tight little fire team here. I'm a recon Marine by background. I've always believed that a small group of people that are smart, focused, and committed can do a great deal of good with that type of chemistry. And our Spec Ops community, as we well know, they get spectacular results because of the people they bring to their teams, the focus and the commitment. They get after it, and they get after it good. So that was the mindset that I entered into. On this team, we have Marty Stittler. Marty is a self-made woman, if you will, an entrepreneur. Started her own telecommunications company years ago out in Virginia. Did extremely well. We have Dale Eisenberg, who is a 40-year franchisee in the original Pancake House system. Terrific guy. An entrepreneur. He's done it. So he has opened up original Pancake Houses, and he also has a throwback, if you will, diner concept for the family called Two Toots Train Whistle Grill. He has 3 units here in Chicago. Our third person on our fire team is Joe Plensler. He's a fairly recently retired Marine Lieutenant Colonel. He is currently the Director of Media for the American Legion. He puts in volunteer time for us where he can. Joe was He was a public affairs officer for General Mattis over in the Middle East. He was the personal public affairs officer for 3 of our commandants in a row. I met Joe years ago. I was a speaker at DI school for the Marine Corps for 11 plus years. I would go out there 4 times a year and explain to the soon-to-be drill instructors what they were going to be doing as opposed to what they thought they were going to be doing, by way of influencing recruits as they molded them into Marines. And if they did it right, they would be a lifelong role model for young men growing into Marines on how a responsible man should behave and conduct his affairs as a citizen, as a son, as a brother, as a father, as a citizen. One thing I neglected to tell you, when I was in high school, Joe, I was a runaway 3 times. I was one of those kids that you would see coming through boot camp a lot, that what I really needed to do, I really needed to see and encounter, was that absolutely typical and very important male role model that all young men need. We are visual learners. Ask any woman. Men are visual learners. And I believe we grow from the mother towards the father. And if we don't have a clear image of how a man is supposed to take care of his business, we're vulnerable. And thank God I ran into Gunnery Sergeant Bell. He is I had a birth father, but Gunny Bell is my father. And he grabbed a hold of me and stretched me mentally and physically, made me his guide. So I was his guide from day 1 to day last. And I was part of that drill instructor school team, if you will, for 11 plus years. It was a wonderful experience. It made me so very much believing in the character and leadership model that our military has, and that we endeavor to embed within our recruits so that they become outstanding Marines. Obviously, if we don't do it well in boot camp, it's not going to go well in the fleet, and it's not going to go well in combat. So that's a little bit of a side venture, but that's how I met Joe Plensler, because he was the director of DI school some years ago. We got into this, and Joe is a very brainy guy. We were sitting around talking about the challenge of veterans, if you will, getting access to capital to start their own businesses. And especially, and I want to say this, especially the junior enlisted personnel, the ones that do the heavy lifting in combat, the ones that come in for one tour, lay it all on the line, leave, and they've got all these incredible character and leadership traits, but that doesn't seem to obviously carry a lot of weight with bankers. Joe made a comment one day, said, why can't they access their GI Bill benefit? And the dialogue went something like, you mean to start their own business? He said, yeah, why not? And we all were sitting around. I said, I don't know. So we began to look into that. And that really got me deeply into the legislative notes of the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944, and that other option, Joe, that those veterans had that veterans of today do not have. And the World War II veterans jumped all over it. Let me say this to you, too. This was a wake-up call. World War II, we had been victorious in the Far East, Pacific, and we had been a part of the, obviously we had defeated the Germans in Europe. So we hear a lot about a grateful nation and the greatest generation and all that. What I found out, Joe, was the GI Bill legislation, called back then Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944, passed by one singular vote.
Really?
One vote. One vote. So when you look back to how this country has treated its veterans coming back, it's less than a pretty picture, to say the least. There's a book called The Wages of War that everybody should read, and it goes all the way back to the Revolutionary War, and it's an eye-opener on how this country has received its veterans back. It started back in the Revolutionary War. Unemployment, you name it, they went through it. War of 1812, Civil War, World War I, the Bonus March. There's a great video out there where General Smedley Butler, a Marine general that held 2 medals of honor, and he's standing on it looks like a Model A Ford, and he's talking to a bunch of these veterans. 10,000 of them came to D.C., Joe, in the early 30s. They've been promised a bonus at the end of World War I. Depression was ongoing. These people were hard up for money, and they assembled peacefully in Washington, D.C., and asked if they could receive their bonus checks. Here's Smedley Butler up there, standing on this vehicle. He's saying, I'll tell you what made this country great. It's just you fellas. He goes on and says a few other things. The net of it was, instead of writing those checks and helping these veterans out, 15 years after they'd been promised that check, we basically said, well, we're gonna give you your bonus check in the form of an escort of tanks, tear gas, and soldiers that are going to run you out of town. And that's precisely what we did. So World War II was an aberration, in my opinion, and the high water mark, but it was barely allowed to be the high water mark. Then you have Korea, then you have the low water mark of Vietnam, and then you have today. And today, there's a term that gets thrown around loosely a lot, and it's veteran friendly. We veterans know that by and large, that's happy talk. When you get under the hood and you see what's going on, today's veterans, there's less than 1% serving. It's very easy for them to slip through the cracks into anonymity. We're aware of the suicide rate, all these things, and these veterans have been run hard and put to bed wet. Joe, we've never seen an operating tempo in the history of our country like we've seen since 9/11. So when these people come back from service, and particularly the ones that have done a lot of heavy lifting, they deserve the opportunity to be treated with dignity and to have the promise of what they've been given realized. As I look back over the history of the GI Bill, and I talk to a lot of veterans, they need the opportunity to be in business for themselves. Now, there are plenty of very good boots to business programs out there, Joe, but the challenge is access to capital. And the very fact that you and I are talking about it today, and there is no coordinated program to do this, speaks ill of our legislators. It speaks ill of veteran services organizations, and it speaks ill of our active duty military leadership who owe these young men and women the benefit of their advocacy and oversight and guidance, if you will, until they go into the grave. Rome, at its apex, treated its legionaries better than we treat our veterans today. That's a fact. So this is what inspired us. We went out and, sometimes, Joe, you don't know what you don't know. So Joe Plenzer lined up some appointments on D.C., and we started knocking on doors of senators and congressmen, telling them about what we felt. And we wandered into the office of a senator named Moran from Kansas, and a lady named Caroline Prosch. She was one of his senior staffers, and she said, "You found the right place." We got involved in the drafting of the legislation for the Veterans Entrepreneurial Act of 2015 to basically take the GI Bill back to its original intent, was full employment. And we were advocating a pilot program so that veterans we could get some of them in the pipeline, let them borrow a certain amount against their their allotment, if you will. We figured it out that the GI Bill, the current GI Bill, all benefits in taking the highest tuition in each state of the public institution in a particular state that had the highest tuition. The average benefit totals out about $160,000+ over a 4-year run. So we felt like a veteran should be able to access at least, a portion of that. And the whole idea here was to give them at least some collateral, Joe, because when a young enlisted Marine, let's say, goes into a bank and they say, okay, young man, well, let's show me what's your credit score? Well, these young folks, when they come into service, number one, if they've got a credit score, it's not going to be much, if anything, and they're not going to have any collateral either. So we were thinking, well, at least if we could give them some collateral, maybe they would have a fighting chance to get through this deal. Maybe. So the bill passed out of the Senate side. It got hung up in the House of Representatives side, principally due to the election cycle. And so it's now been brought back again as the Veterans Entrepreneurial Act of 2017. And we've...
Hey, Lynn, I hate to cut you off there, but are you serious that your organization, One Vet at a Time, is actually the one that started this whole thing?
We were definitely a principal part of it. Absolutely. Wow. I mean, we're a team. So
because I'm well aware of what's been happening and where that bill is. I did not know that Jerry Moran was involved with it from the beginning. He actually has an office about 500 meters from my house in Kansas City. So I didn't know that part. So.
Tell him thank you, and now it's really the impetus now is coming from Representative Fortenberry, by the way, okay. from his office over on the House of Representatives side. But we've extended it one step further, Joe, and I believe that the more I was around it and the more I've talked about it and thought about it, I think these veterans, it ought to be viewed as a bank account. I mean, look. If you really think about it, then there's I'm a lawyer by background, but I probably like you, Joe. You went to college and so did I. I did that, but I was educated in the Marine Corps, and in particular in combat. Mm-hmm. Now, when people come out of the service, we say, okay, well, you got a benefit, you got this GI Bill. Oh, that's great. So if you go to college, you get the full benefit. If you go to a trade school, you get some of that benefit. But if you decide to be an entrepreneur, start your own business, we hope that you grow your business so that you can hire other veterans and mentor them and move them along. If one of our veterans decides to do that, remembering 49% did, in the 9 years following World War II, well, today we say, I'm sorry, we got nothing for you. I think that's very unjust. I think it's very discriminatory.
Do you think it has anything to do, and maybe nobody would ever be willing to admit this, but do you think the holdup is, if you just give somebody a big pile of cash, $160,000 or half of that or whatever, you don't know what they're going to do with it, and it could be squandered, and then the guy ends up with nothing from it. But if you entrust our major institutions, colleges, universities around the country with that money, at least maybe the kid will come out with a piece of paper that says they've got a degree. And a whole bunch of other people benefit from the GI Bill, all the money and the trickle down theory through the universities, ultimately allowing the veterans into their schools, guaranteed tuition payments and all that jazz. Do you think it has anything to do with that? Because if the veteran ends up becoming successful as an entrepreneur, obviously there's the ultimate benefit, but what are the chances of them failing? And of course, don't get me wrong, I'm in full support of what you guys are pushing for. But I'm just wondering if the people that are resisting, one is just change, of course, but I just wonder if they're willing to pull, the potential of not giving that money to the universities and colleges and it goes out into the business world instead.
Well, I think that is the principal objection most people bring up. What I would tell you is, number one, I went to school on higher education and the treatment of veterans and the GI Bill and those monies, as I said before, when I was out in Missouri. One of the things I found was, well, let me put it to you this way. I ran into a guy on campus there. I made it a habit to get to know all my veterans. And we had a young man that I ran into who had been a combat medic, 2 tours with the Army, went to the sandbox, slugged it out, was also worked in a combat ICU. And this school where I was at had a great nursing program. So he was there, and I just ran into this fellow, and I introduced myself, asked him, "What are you doing here?" And he said, "I'm in the School of Nursing." I said, "That's great. What'd you do in the Army?" He told me. I'm thinking to myself, wow, well, he probably was pretty far down the road knowing what the rigor and the comprehensiveness and the detail of training in the Army and the Navy to become a combat medic, if you will, or corpsman in the Marine Corps. So I asked him, and I said, well, how'd you do with your transfer of service schools credit? He said, well, sir, he said, they gave me 3 hours for PE. Now, you can understand what's going through my mind when I hear this. So I steamed over right away to the head of the nursing college, a very good woman, by the way, and I sat down with her and I told her, I said, we've got an issue here and I want to bring it up to you. Do you know this particular young man? I mentioned his name, and she said, oh, he's wonderful. In fact, he's the student representative to our faculty committee. And I said, Julie, I said, just so you know, between you and me, he could be teaching over here. I said, the things that he has done in combat, those people up there and standing in front of that chalkboard are never going to do. It's one thing to tend to somebody when you're in a hospital setting. It's something else to do it when you're laying in the sand and somebody's trying to kill you as you're trying to help this man and to keep him from dying. I said, I don't want to be overly dramatic here, but that is the reality of it in many cases. So I said, we need to work on this. What I found was that there's an articulation table for universities that belong to the Service Members Opportunity College situation, and there's a network, if you will, and there's a table that they're supposed to apply for service school education. And I did a lot of work in there and realized that in a lot of cases, that table is not followed. In this young man's case, he took considerable number of hours that he should have never had to take, and taxpayers paid for it. And that goes on, I think, more than we would like it to go on around the country.
Oh, yeah. I know of several people in the same position, yeah.
So, higher education has its place, but it's not for everybody.
Yeah. Hey, Lynn, unfortunately, we're getting close to the end of our time here. Tell us where we can go to support One Vet at a Time and find out what you guys are doing, and if anybody wants to get involved and keep abreast of what you guys are doing.
Yeah, they can find us at we have a Facebook page for One Vet at a Time, and we're about ready to launch a website for it. But you can, if you type in the number one, Vet at a Time, all together, VETATATIME, you'll find our Facebook page currently. And if you Google us, you'll find information. I just want to say one thing. We have also approached this topic, Joe, from the state level. We have the first state that has passed legislation that can, where a veteran can have access to startup capital. There is a criteria. I wanted to address one quick thing to your concern about, well, if they go to higher ed and get a degree, at least they've got something. We have in place a due diligence criteria that didn't exist in World War II. And it would apply at the federal level and the state level. Number one, you must be an honorably discharged veteran. Number two, you have to take an approved Boots of Business program verified. Number three, you have to go take your business plan to a committee and have it Shark Tanked. At that committee, it's going to be green light, yellow light, red light. If you're green lighted, then you pass on through and you can apply for your loan. So we have due diligence steps in place, none of which existed post-World War II. And the notion there, to your point, is we want to make sure these people understand entrepreneurship is not for the faint-of-hearted, but it is very sequential, and we want to make sure that they have the chance to have their ideas vetted, and also, by the way, we assign them a mentor for up to a year, a seasoned mentor from a panel of people that volunteer. So we're going to go state by state by state by state, and ultimately, Joe, I think the action and the application will probably be more at the state level than the federal level. Reason being, the federal level, there's a real dogfight over the whole notion of the GI Bill. And also people need to realize that not everybody on Capitol Hill wants every veteran to access that GI Bill. And that's a whole nother topic for another time.
All right, Lynn, great information. You guys are doing phenomenal service to our veterans out there. And it's great to talk to somebody that's actually behind the push for this bill, because I've been watching the status of it for a couple of years now. So if ever we can do anything for you, be sure to let us know, and certainly check out One Vet at a Time if you're listening and want to keep abreast of what's going on or get involved. So thanks, Lynn. And unfortunately, we're out of time. So if there's anybody that's listening that wants to get in contact with you, can they contact you via the website One Vet at a Time also?
They can contact me at Lowder, CLOWDER at One Vet at a Time. Also, Joe, I have launched a speaking business, and I'm out talking quite a bit on leadership and character. I wanted to mention that. And that is www.clynnlowder.com, and they can find out information about me there. Watch what happens at the state level. Watch what happens there. That is where I believe we'll make much more progress, much faster, and much more effectively, because we're closer to the point of need, closer to the community, closer to everything. So we've got it passed in Illinois. So if you know anybody in Illinois, any legislators, pick up the phone, tell them you're aware of it, and you're looking forward to seeing it happen. We're rolling it out here, I'd say probably in the next 3 or 4 months. Okay.
All right, Lynn. Outstanding. I appreciate you sharing all that information with us, and keep going. We look forward to seeing that bill get passed eventually.
Thanks for your time, Joe.
All right, Lynn. These two Marines are Oscar Mike. As you can tell from listening to the Veteran on the Move podcast, interviews are a great way to tell your story and spread the word about your business. If you would like to get booked as a podcast guest, I recommend Interview Valet. You can check out Interview Valet at veteranonthemove.com/valet. Be sure to check out Thrive15.com, the world's premier online education platform that helps entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs, and intrapreneurs learn how to start or grow a successful business. Start your free 30-day membership by going to Thrive15.com and use the promo code VETERAN. Thank you for listening to Veteran on the Move, your pathfinder to freedom. If you like the show, leave us a review on iTunes. Reviews are always greatly appreciated. So until next time, this veteran is Oscar Mike.